Rob, I know I can't hear you. I'm not sure if you're coming through for other folks.
Are you hearing me now? Hello? Is that working? Oh, shoot. Okay, so let's start this again. Okay. Don't we just love technology? Anyway, welcome everybody. This is Rob Darrow from iNACOL. I'm the Director of Member Services, and I coordinate the webinar series for iNACOL. Our webinar presentation today is entitled 21st Century Skills, Implementing Online Course Requirement Policies for High School Graduation, and we have some outstanding speakers here today to talk about these particular topics. Before we officially get started, I just want to let you know that you received a link through the webinar email that gives you the recording to this, so you can go back and listen to this at any time in the future. So without further ado, I think we should get started, and I'd like to take this opportunity to first introduce to you Amy Murin, who works with Evergreen Education Group. They're the group that publishes Keeping Pace for many years, and she can tell you about that, but we're excited to have her here. And of course, those of you who are attending Virtual School Symposium later this month will get a copy of that, and we're excited to hear about the next version. But for today, Amy's going to focus on our topic of the day. So Amy, on to you.
Great, thank you, Rob. Could I get folks to give me a thumbs up in the chat window or let me know if you can hear me okay? I just want to make sure that my audio is coming through just fine. Just let me know through the chat if everything sounds good. Yay, thank you, Elfie. Beautiful. I'm going to keep going. If at any point my voice starts to fade in or out, please just let me know. Thanks so much, folks. So my name is Amy Murin. I'm with the Evergreen Education Group, which publishes the report Keeping Pace with K-12 Online, and as of this year, and blended learning. So we're really excited about that big shift, and that should tell you something about what we're covering in the report this year. It just went to print last week, and so I'm still in a little bit of a daze, but we're really excited to release the report at BSS. We'll have 2 sessions covering Keeping Pace, a presentation, and then a panel discussion with some of our sponsors. We have 14 terrific sponsors who fund the report but also participate in its research development and writing, and those folks will join us at those presentations as well. The research that I'm going to talk to you about today came out of this year's report, and so you're hearing a little bit of a sneak preview of what happened, of what we're publishing in the report that will come out in 2 weeks, so it'll be released at BSS in 2 weeks. So let's talk, actually, I'm going to back up for a quick second and give you a little bit of an overview of the online learning requirement landscape. What I'd like to talk about today, we hear a lot about online learning requirements, and you're going to hear from one district and hear details about how the Kenosha district is handling their requirements. But I'm going to talk specifically about state-level requirements. There are 7 states that have some sort of requirements. In Keeping Pace, we actually say that there are 5 that have an online course requirement, but I'm going to talk through the details of those, because how they are described both in legislation or in their State Board of Education ruling details, wherever it actually passed, the requirement may or may not have legs. And so I'd like to talk about how some of those are written, and also a little bit about how some of those are implemented in some states. So let's look first at Florida, and actually Florida is a great example because it is perhaps the only online learning requirement that actually mandates that students must take 1 online course. So it just began last year with 9th graders, so it was legislation that passed in summer 2011. The exception there about grades 6 through 8 just means that if any of the 9th graders that started last year, this year, or next year took an online course in middle school, that will count toward their high school graduation requirement. But at some point, the 9th graders will have to take something in high school. As you know, Florida Virtual School has the largest state virtual school in the country, and in fact, we will be reporting 303,329 course enrollments in the last school year. And so they're very well set up to support this requirement. They've got a lot of options for students, plus every district in the state, every district of a particular size must have at least 3 online options for students. So students have the choice of going to the state virtual school or to the one of their district options. There are a lot of consortia developing around the state in response to recent legislation. So I would say that this is the strongest online learning requirement in the country at this time. And I am going to watch the chat window over there, so please do jump in, and if I can't address your question as we're going through, I'll come back to it at the end. Now let's talk about Idaho. Idaho had a big fuss a couple years ago as they were talking about passing their online course requirement. And in fact, initially they talked about mandating 4 or even 5 classes for students, and that did not go over very well. So last year, SB 1184 mandated students take 2 online courses. However, this year, new legislation amends that requirement basically to allow for blended learning. So what I've done in these slides is to highlight that, yes, there are 2 online courses that are required, and that's what's highlighted in blue, but in italics, which these are my italics and my emphasis, you'll see that it's a little bit softer of a requirement. It doesn't have to be a fully online course. Students and teachers don't have to be in different locations, and it doesn't have to be, it only has to be 51% of the curriculum delivering online. So Idaho is still figuring theirs out. There also is a referendum up on the November ballot that might take back the entire piece of legislation. So we'll see how that goes in a few weeks. Michigan has one of the oldest online learning requirements and actually one of the oldest state virtual schools. And as you can see here, students must meet an online course or learning experience requirement. What's interesting in Michigan is that even though they do have this exception, in general, it does appear that students are taking online courses, and that could be because Michigan Virtual School is one of the larger state virtual schools, and I want to say about 25,000 course enrollments last year. My numbers are running together in my own head. But there are a lot of supplemental options for students in the state, and so a lot of ways for students to meet that requirement. There are other ways that students can meet that requirement, and so that's the online learning experience. And we're starting to see this learning experience language popping up in more states as more states pass online learning legislation. Virginia just passed their online learning requirement legislation this year, and what they did is to tell the State Board of Education to modify its graduation requirements so that students must successfully complete 1 virtual course. And I gave this some italics too, but the reality is that a non-credit bearing course is still a virtual course, and so it would still have students moving through a fully online course. And so I would actually say this is also very strong, but we're really interested to see what the State Board of Ed does. The requirement doesn't kick in until 9th graders next year, and so the State Board of Ed has this year to add some legs to this requirement and give it some detail. So we're interested to see what Virginia comes up with this one. And then there are a couple of other states that are talked about as having online learning requirements. West Virginia specifies an online learning experience. An online course is one option, and West Virginia is a state that has a state virtual school, and so students do have that supplemental course option. In West Virginia, the West Virginia State Virtual School is funded via an appropriation, and technically it's first come, first served, although they've been able to serve all the course enrollments that came to them in the last year, and that's been typical over the last couple of years. And so that option is available for students. Again, it's all dependent on implementation, and so there are other ways. An electronic portfolio is one way that students can meet the online learning experience. Students can also do a project-based learning unit online. West Virginia has a portal of online content that allows students and teachers to access a variety of different resources, and if a student passes through a unit of that online content, that can count for their online learning experience. New Mexico is one that folks talk about all the time as having an online learning requirement, but you can see here that there are a variety of options for how students can meet that. If they take an advanced placement course, an honors course, or any dual enrollment, so a college level course at their high school, that also counts for their online learning. So the the distance learning course is one way of meeting it, and Ideal, New Mexico, which is the state virtual school in New Mexico, serves, I want to say, about 9,000 students last year, so they also have a good option available. Albuquerque Public Schools has supplemental course options available. So there are some options for students to take their supplemental online course. There aren't a ton. And so that's one reason I would guess that New Mexico's online learning requirement hasn't become mandatory without all of these additional options. So those are the 7 states that have some form of online learning requirements. And we also know that there are district requirements. You're going to hear more from Kenosha today, but there are other districts around the country that have past requirements for their students. I would love to know more about other districts that are out there. If you know of any, I would be delighted to hear from you. I'm going to throw my email address in the chat window here, and if you want to shoot me an email and tell me, or if you want to post it in the chat window over there now, that would be great. We're starting to see this more and more, and it's an interesting progression, and actually I'm excited to hear the Kenosha folks talk about why they decided to do it and what they're doing. Memphis City Schools just passed theirs last year, 2 years ago, I think, and Putnam County Schools last year as well. So we're starting to see more districts adding that option. So let's talk about what this means, because as I talked about, there's the requirement, there's what's in legislation, but there is also the implementation of it. In Michigan, even though students have the option of this online learning experience, it appears that most students are taking a supplemental fully online course. That could partially be because Michigan Virtual School makes that option available, as well as district programs and consortia around the state. And so we expect that as more states and districts pass these online learning requirements, that there will be an increase in demand for courses available from state agencies, so through those state virtual schools, through districts, through various consortia, whether it's an education service agency like a BOCES or a RESA, Regional Education Service Agency in Wisconsin, that there will be a growth in supplemental options for students around the country. So we're anticipating a growth in supplemental options for students in Virginia, and actually they now have, I believe it's 15 approved multi-district online providers in the state, which is new as of this past year. And so they're set up well to serve that need for students. Obviously, the key concern is making sure that that online learning course isn't just checking something off the list, but that it's a high-quality experience for students, and that they're not just learning course content, but they're also learning 21st century skills. They're learning how to work in a learning management system. About half of all four-year colleges today have their students taking online courses, even if students are residents at a brick-and-mortar campus. And so it's really important for college-bound students to be prepared for those opportunities, but then career-bound students as well also need to be prepared to work in an online environment. It's hard to come up with a job today that doesn't have some sort of online component to it, whether it's just checking in with your time card or it's sitting at a computer all day, like I get to do. So we want to make sure there's a focus on quality, and I saw that the Kenosha folks are going to address that. And so I feel like that could be a terrific way for me to transition over to them. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat window, and I'll be happy to answer them. I have to tell you, I might have to step out in about 15 minutes, so I apologize ahead of time. Please email me any questions you have, and I will happily get back to you, and come say hi at BSS if you are there. And Raj?
Thanks, Amy. That was great. So just to let everybody know on this webinar, so you saw the list of school districts that are now requiring an online course requirement for graduation. There's just a few of them around the nation, but it certainly makes sense, as Amy pointed out, that as we move from more state-level programs to district-level programs, that we may see more policies along those lines. So I'm putting in the chat room the EdWeek article about Kenosha Unified that caught my attention, and was excited to know that their administrators, Dan Tenuta and Chris Keckler, would be here to share a little bit about how that happened, because having worked in a school district myself, I know there are many challenges in moving a policy such as this forward. So I'd like to introduce you to Dan and Chris, who will talk a little bit about how it happened in their school district and how it was implemented. And I would invite you, if you've got questions along those lines, to ask them as we go along. So Dan and Chris.
Thanks. I'm Dan Tenuta. I'm the Assistant Superintendent. I'm here with Chris, and we're going to kind of share going over each one of the slides with the group, and we'll answer any questions that you might have. A little bit about our district, just to give you some background. Kenosha is the third largest school district in the state of Wisconsin. We've got around 23,000 students, and we began our online learning graduation requirements starting with our freshman group this year. I want to talk a little bit about how this is kind of a grassroots effort. A couple of years ago, we went through our transformational design plan for the district, which is in more traditional terms, I guess, a strategic plan for the district. And one of the things that was brought forward by our superintendent, Dr. Michelle Hancock, was really thinking about using technology to leverage student achievement throughout the district. And so she was a huge advocate for that in our district and really changed the way that we really thought about delivering our instruction program for all of our kids. To give you a little background, I think our school district was probably like everyone else's, that in a certain sense we were afraid of the technology a little bit, and she kind of brought it forward about how schools were handling things like cell phones in the school, and a lot of people probably would have been more in support if that we wouldn't have technology in the school because they looked at it as more of a deterrent than it does something that would enhance education. Well, that turned around pretty quickly as we began to educate people in terms of what the value was in terms of using technology as a way of enhancing achievement. The other piece to that was the fact that our district always had a belief in using what we called in Wisconsin instrumentality charter schools, which are district-formed charter schools. And we had established an e-school as a separate school within our district to have an online virtual school for all of our kids in the district. And the interesting point of that is that I think it was more in the realm of having another option of a school, not necessarily trying to make it a universal strategy for all students. So we got on board with the e-school and quickly, with the direction of Chris Keckler, and we quickly began to see the value for all students. And so from that part of having that e-school experience and the fact that we wanted to expand the use of technology for all our students, we began to thinking of how we could make this something that would be an expectation for all kids. And so as you can see, the online graduation requirement came forward and we brought it to the board, and so far we're very excited about having that as a requirement, and I think it's been accepted widely across our school district, and something that I think we're looking at trying to use even more widely, even at their middle schools and across their entire district.
This is Chris. I'm going to take over the next couple of slides here. As Dan laid the groundwork on how our district kind of adopted more of a technological focus for our district, which is something hard to do, obviously based on the size of your district, and then also the addressing the concerns from the particular stakeholder groups, whether they're teachers or parents or students. We wanted to make sure that we were doing our due diligence and responsibility and making sure that we had supportive steps along each way. And so even though the Kenosha E-School as a high school component kind of emerged in 2007, it was only recently that we felt the support structure was there, the understanding level was there, and the teacher integration piece was there only in the last year or so for expansions to middle school and then ultimately to elementary levels starting this past fall. And so we've seen that not just from the fully online e-school portion, but also the additional components that teachers just on their own begin to integrate inside their classrooms. And so we have a pretty supportive instructional technology department here at the central office that obviously services and supports those students. Obviously, one of the biggest benefits that Kenosha had is that we weren't alone in developing this. We were part of the Wisconsin eSchool Network right now, which is about a consortium, a nonprofit consortium of about 15 different districts, 15 of the largest districts in the state. There's a couple different levels of partnerships with them, so you have invested members or affiliate members, and it's operated now by a board of directors. I was actually the first president of the board of directors, more from the standpoint of participating with them and going through the growing pains of making a nice supportive entity. And there was, I know, an Ed Week article that interviewed some of the staff we have. We have 2 full-time staff members, a director and a support person for the Wisconsin eSchool Network, that were able to have a larger leveraging ability both with vendors and also support services when you have a larger group. So if that is an option for any of you moving forward, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Make sure you investigate them and that it's appropriate, but there is tremendous benefit in that investment. Real quickly, I'm just going to go through a couple graph slides to show the change. There are obviously several different models of virtual programs out there. The Kenosha eSchool is one that services both full and part-time students, and also one of the big benefits that we have is that we allow for rolling enrollment, whereas we have students basically starting at almost any point in the year. And so this graph representing the last 3 years of full-time enrollments, where last year we did experience some of the middle school students, so that did account for some of that increase. But to put it in perspective, the starting point for this year, I don't have it in there, but the starting full-time number for this year was actually at about 145. So it already exceeded where it left off the previous year, and it's continued, even though it was in the low 140s, it's above 152 or so right now, I think was the last count. So we're expecting to see similar trends with that. Similarly, to help out basically the high school group, is this is our part-time enrollment figures, and really the last year we were experiencing a significant increase, and again this year as well. That number is much higher at the starting point than where it was the last few years. So this is mainly high school students looking to supplement or have the blended version where they do a mix of some traditional or brick and mortar classes, and then they pepper it with 1 or 2 online courses to supplement their educational desires or needs or whatever fits best in their schedule. So it's one in which we have, as a single district, have experienced the increased demand and expectation of these students. One of the key components as we go through kind of the support structure here was the identification of who has access and not just the desire but the accessibility to take an online course. And so, I drew up the graph. This one I think is about 2 months old from a CNN Money publication looking at the household incomes versus those that own a computer. And so the district right now, we fit into about a 15 to 18% category of groups that really don't have reliable internet access at home, even though our district now has just over 50% of economically disadvantaged households, which has increased, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, but it's one in which we are supplementing a lot of Title I funds, or have, to make either one-to-one schools or increasing the amount of technological support for them. And so we've increased loaner laptops that are available at schools for students that fit that need. And then also we've worked with the community. We're going to address that a little bit later, but making sure we're promoting the community access and what you may have in your community to help supplement that as well, either through your local libraries or other institutions that you could partner with. For those that are looking to expand, you want to be careful of the quality of the curriculum that you're working with. I have 3 up here that we've used in the past. When the Wisconsin eSchool Network was first forming, in utilizing grant dollars, they did partner and purchase a lot of the curriculum, a perpetual license through Florida Virtual. As some of those member districts only offered part-time enrollment options, Kenosha wanted to make sure that it had enough course offerings so that if a student wanted to do their entire high school career online, we had to go out and find some supplemental offerings, and that's where Eventa came in. eDynamic is another one that we were excited to bring on board last year, where they, if you don't know, they focus only on elective courses, and there was a lot of neat options that they had out there. So it's one in which, even though you're bringing in different vendors, you don't want to make the list too big for consistency's sake, but you also want to make sure that you go through a good quality course adoption process. Kenosha, still being large enough, has a central office that we have content coordinators for each of the key areas, and so when there's any type of course adoption process, whether it's a virtual course or a regular traditional course, that there is the building approval level process, and then there's the coordinator adoption process, and then the appropriate administrative approval. When the Kenosha eSchool was first looking at virtual courses, they were going off a standard line that the virtual course needed to meet at least 80% consistency of the standards and benchmarks of the traditional counterpart. And so that was easier to do with courses that were existing from the standpoint of an Algebra 1 class to an Algebra 1 class, but it got a little bit more challenging with some of the e-dynamic courses, for example. They have one in Gothic literature, and so in that case we have to dig a little bit deeper and make sure that we're covering those standards and that it is a quality offering for our students. As Amy did a phenomenal job earlier when we then noticed that we're having more and more students take online courses and servicing that need, both addressing the interest of the students, but also from the financial standpoint. I know a lot of districts look at this purely as a money-saving scenario, and that's not always true. There are some reports out there that are quality reports that pinpoint the fact that not every online program will save money. It depends on what the setup is, the support structure, and other components that go into it. And so when we look to expand and establish an online graduation requirement, we wanted to make sure we isolated any of the components related to other examples. And so Amy did a phenomenal job looking through that. And so then our decisions came to be, are we going to require a completion of the course, a successful completion of the course, more than one course? Is it just going to be attempting the course or a participation level? And what other quality components were going to be in there as far as an LMS system, progress monitoring, communication, number of hours online. And so we kind of had some internal meetings to discuss and finalize that proposal.
I want to continue talking a little bit is for districts that are looking to create an online requirement outside of a state mandate to do so. One of the things that we did in order to get this going is we took a look at our entire graduation requirements for all our students. And again, graduation requirements is really set up in order to look to say, what do kids need in order to be successful, not only to prepare themselves for more school, but to prepare themselves for life in general and to be a productive worker. And so what we really did is look at all our components. And a couple of things that we did is that we did modify the number of credits that they had, but we looked at a couple things. Service is something, and service learning and projects along that has been something that we did independently but really didn't require of all students. And so one of the things that we put in was a 10-hour requirement for every single student, and then we also have a service of distinction requirement. I noticed that when Amy gave her talk, she talked a little bit about some of the projects for service could be done online, which I think is a really neat idea. The other piece was to say, okay, what do kids really need to? And one of the things that, just from a very realistic point of view, and myself knowing a lot of college kids, is that they were all taking online classes throughout their year, and we really needed to have all our kids ready for, if they chose to go to post-secondary, is to really be ready for online classes. And so what we did is we revamped all of our graduation requirements, and so I would recommend that people take a look at it in kind of a holistic manner and fold in all of those things that you really believe you need in your district to make kids prepared for that next level.
So in looking specifically at the online learning requirement, we wanted to not make it so limited for both a management standpoint, but also the public sphere standpoint, to say, okay, you're just limited to a requirement of taking an online course through the Kenosha eSchool. We realized that a lot of teachers and schools were integrating a lot more of online resources and technology, and so we wanted to make sure we were being faithful to that investment and not marginalizing them. And so basically the online requirement that we have right now is you either participate in an eSchool course or participate in a course with those identified high quality components. And I believe it was one of the southern state ones that this one's a little bit similar to as far as what they were expecting. But we wanted to make sure that we promoted this. We've worked with the instructional technology department to be a resource that teachers and other building administrators could call upon if needed to help elaborate some of this stuff. And as you can see, as we move along in identifying those quality courses, we created a form that the teachers could fill out for submission for their course to be approved along these lines. And so when we held one of our parent meetings, we'll talk about those a little bit later, there was a lot of fears from the parents that didn't want their students to take just purely an online course. They just wanted to see if there was other options, and so we had to make sure we were addressing those fears and those concerns, that we're being respectful and responsible as well, and still preparing their students for life outside of our educational environment. And so in doing this, we're going to be able to call upon the resources of the counselors to promote those courses. They're also responsible as far as the graduation requirements go, as far as validating that the student did complete those courses or participate in them. If it's an eSchool course, on their transcript, the course identifier number actually has a little E attached to it, so that's an easy call. If it's another course, the building specifically just have to keep a running list of those courses that were approved at the building level that meet this requirement. And so one of the other key components is the instructional technology teachers. Right now we have almost one full-time teacher at every one of the high school levels, and then pretty much all the middle school levels have a ITT resource person as well. There's one or two of them that share a position, some of the smaller schools, but they're ones in which their entire responsibility is to integrate technology into the instructional realm and do it in a responsible and knowledgeable way for the staff and for the building administrators. And so in doing this, I got a couple of the other entities that we work with. For those that don't know, we utilize a LMS or learning management system. We have a district-wide license for My Big Campus, which I know a lot of other post-secondary institutions use. And then also recently we've expanded and supported and now supplied email addresses. We partnered with Google, as so many other districts are doing, to not only provide central office authenticated email addresses, but also access to the Google Apps suite. Right now it's just the Google Doc applications, but obviously we do have access and plan to roll out other Google Apps as we want to make sure we're supportive in that entity, but it'll be throughout this year and beyond as we find ways to integrate those components.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about our creating awareness for asynchronous learning and the need for kids to be involved in learning kind of 24/7. One of the things that we did that we're excited about and we think is real unique is that we had put forward a waiver to the Department of Public Instruction in Wisconsin that we asked, instead of having the required 180 school days, we actually have put in a waiver for 175. 5 of those days, students do not attend school. The teachers and staff do come in, and we do professional development with all our staff. A lot of that professional development is used to leverage increasing the use of technology in the school, along with other student achievement initiatives. But the other part of it is that we created an awareness where those 5 days are also learning days for students. So every one of our schools, 6th through 12th grade, are really working with kids on that day to be involved in some type of asynchronous learning activity. If you look at our website, our Kenosha Unified website, and you can click on student information, and then you go to a link that'll say asynchronous learning, and there'll be activities, enrichment activities that are all there for different courses from 6 through 12 plus. Those are just in addition to all the asynchronous activities that are being done throughout the district at individual schools. One of the things that also, and Chris mentioned earlier, is that because of the need to make sure that we have plenty of access for kids, each one of our secondary schools actually during that in-service day had a sign-up for students that would want to come in during that day and use our equipment in terms of coming to computer labs and signing in and using the lab while the teachers are in in-service training. I also had a community meeting where I invited in different folks throughout our community and asked them if they would be willing to open their doors during that day. And we were fortunate to have 4 different places. We had the Boys and Girls Club, we had our Urban Outreach Center, we had one of our post-secondary schools, Gateway, and also we had another place where kids were able to go to, along with the public libraries, that they could access this. And so it was really a neat piece. The community got involved, a great way of actually forming partnerships. So that worked out really well and something that we were excited about doing. We're monitoring student usage. We're going back to our board later this month and talking about the access that we had on that. And so we're pretty excited about that. Dan, can I ask you to go back one slide to your asynchronous days?
Yeah. So somebody in the chat room asked, is this for grades 6 through 12 or K through 12? And then was there any resistance or challenges with the DPI in granting this? And then I think you said teachers still meet on these days, but kids are doing work. Is that correct?
That is correct. What it is that it was a waiver for professional development, and we've asked for 5 full days of being off school. However, what we wanted to make sure is that learning was still going on, and so from grades 6 through 12, we were engaging all the kids in asynchronous learning activities during that time. So when kids came back to school, they'd obviously have participated in online activities. We even created kind of on the website places where parents could go if they weren't quite sure if there's, you know, how sometimes kids won't know what assignments they're doing, that they could certainly log on and get into enrichment activities. And then we also secured community places for kids to go because school wasn't in session. Even though we did open up the schools as well, we had people waiting in our libraries and computer labs for them. So it was something that really tried to look at this asynchronous activity as something that would be just part of learning 24/7.
So the waiver was just granted? There was nobody at the state questioned it?
Well, I had to get approval from the state. I had wrote a waiver report. I brought it forward. I explained what we were going to do on the professional development days, and then also explained that I originally came in with 6 days that I wanted, and they approved us for 5. One of our goals is that eventually, if we can show that there is participation across the schools, that this is something that is really a valid way of using your school instructional days, is that this kind of opens up a lot of opportunities for professional development, because you can have you can think about how you would be able to use your school year in terms of getting days for professional development. I see another question there. It says, does the PD provider ever provide the student enrichment activities?
Well, we only generate those ourselves right now. And the enrichment activities, keeping them voluntary, is the fact that even though we designate the days as asynchronous on those days, the fact that they're available on our websites and on the individual schools' websites provides students access those at any time. We gave training to the instructors, but we also gave them great freedom and abilities to define these on their own. And in some cases, they're voluntary. They're not supposed to have any academic impact, or at least a penalty if the students didn't do it, for example. Whether or not they're directly tied to the current lesson that was going on, or they're just self-contained activities. And so it's utilizing the technology in that sense. And even though we made the vast majority of them online, we still expected schools to develop offline activities that could be integrated online. For example, for PE classes, you could have it where the students use, the teacher finds an online calorie counter, and students need to just count their calories or log in for that day, and then anonymously submit those back to the teacher. Well, obviously, if you don't have a computer, the offline version of that is that the student just keeps a log, pen and paper style, and then when they get back to class, they can still submit that to the teacher anonymously, and then they could still participate in that activity. And so we looked and gave several examples that students could use in trying to broaden their experiences with online learning and activities.
Yeah, one of the things that was kind of neat, some of the individual schools, for instance, some of the schools decided their math people were going to do all asynchronous math activities. We've got another one coming up on October 19th, and then some of the schools were going to do social studies asynchronous activities. Some did it by grade level. So it was really a way of the schools trying to look at ways to engage kids in kind of an organized way. And so this is our first one. We just had it. I'll meet again with our community partners to see if kids are coming in there, if we need to advertise it, or is it something that we really don't need those spots out there that most kids will have access. So we're monitoring it, and you know, who knows, maybe we'll come forward and ask for more days as we go forward in the future.
The students do submit to the teacher in any number of different ways, and we are able to count those as attendance days for our students in this fashion. The state did recognize that.
Now, one of the things for our waiver is that we still meet the state requirement for minutes for the school year, and even though we don't have the 175 days, but we do meet the minute requirement as well. As we go forward, I think the state would be more willing even to look at the minutes not being met. Again, if we can show that kids are being engaged in school activities. Again, if you have an e-school, that daily average, that daily requirement for attendance is waived. So it's really kind of a neat opportunity.
Moving ahead, and still want to be aware of the time, so some of these we already kind of hit on. When we look to expand the online learning requirement, these are some of the key focus groups that we've worked with as far as presentations to the parents, other teachers, administrators, making sure there was communal awareness. One of the most interesting presentations we did was to a retired educator group, knowing that those people still have a lot of close ties to the existing educators and also other community members. And you know, it's fun to speak to a retired educator group, and then it's additionally fun to to speak to them about something technology related. So if anybody's been there, I know you know what you're talking about. So some of the key resources that have really helped the Kenosha eSchool as a charter school, we were initially funded by a state-supplied startup grant, as a lot of the virtual programs in Wisconsin districts were. Now, one of the other key pieces is that all of the charter schools for Kenosha Unified, which there were 6 of them, they are all instrumentality charters, and there was a funding agreement that was established a few years ago. However, we had to modify the eSchools slightly because we were the only charter school that allowed for part-time enrollment, and so we came up with I developed a realistic formula to count those partial enrollments and equate those to a full FTE amount, and thus get the recognition. And ultimately, it has been a benefit for the district because it services a lot more students than just the full-time ones. But if you are looking to go this route, the eSchool, at least ours, is big enough. The eSchool consultant that we've had since the start has been probably one of the most fundamental necessary positions, and the one that we've realized the most benefit from. And then also we have a full-time counselor now just to address those students and their needs, because those that are coming to us full-time usually have some necessity, or a lot of times they have a necessity on why they're looking to do full-time online enrollment, and we want to make sure we're supporting them outside of just the academic realm. Some of the concerns that we've also hit on before, providing access or laptops to students when possible, promoting the usage of those public sites, and then also defining all these options for this online graduation requirement, making sure that people understood that it's not just taking a full online course, that they're going to be experiencing a lot of courses. And when we gave some of those other presentations, we figured that in the 4 years that it would take before this graduation requirement kicked in for the cohort group of 2016, if the enrollments for the Kenosha eSchool at the high school level stayed consistent or unchanged, we had estimated that 45 to 55% of the high school population would have already met that requirement. So knowing now that we've incorporated existing traditional courses and identifying them, make this pretty much that we think this is a requirement that most students will just accidentally complete in just some of their interests in the courses that they take during their 4 years. Some of the challenges that may be gone through your mind as you've listened to this presentation: making sure that it's realistic and attainable, that we're promoting the quality usage of it. The one prerequisite for the Kenosha eSchool is that you must pass the orientation mini course, which is just a week-long course. Takes about four hours to complete, but it is a preparatory course in learning online and some of the key components there. And then opposite of that, one thing that we've already incorporated this year at the middle school level is a 21st century skills-based class. And so that one promotes a lot of online learning and appropriate usage. And we are looking to take the orientation requirement and actually making that a required middle school course as well, just to prepare students. And then obviously, as anybody is working with adopting any type of technology, the amount of resources that teachers just grab on their own and integrate is always increasing. And so you want to make sure you're promoting that and supporting that at the same time, but that does become quite the juggling act.
Now, the area for suggestions going forward, and I think there's some key things in order to make this happen in my mind. I think one, identifying staff that have industry awareness. We were real fortunate that Chris was involved in the eSchool and was someone that I really viewed as at the forefront of understanding the value of online learning and what it can bring for all students. I think one of the other things that happens is to make sure that you build understanding for all people. For example, myself, being a leader in terms of supervising all the principals, one of the things that I did just personally is I became certified in online learning. I took the certification for Wisconsin, and one of the things that it brought to me is I clearly understood the benefits of being an online learner. And so the next piece of that is that when I do my evaluation for principals, is one of the expectations is that they too would become aware of that, so you can begin supervising and begin to understand really how you would leverage that in your building. I think another piece in terms of what happens is that the support that you would get from the administrators in terms of the school board, the superintendent, I think is key in terms of being able to kind of thinking outside the box. I was a building principal that was involved in creating a lot of different programs. I was at an alternative school and was used to being able to create programming that was a little bit different from everyone else. And so being able to come forward with recommendations that are different from just the traditional way of delivering instruction is something that you'd want to get people that are on board with that and really allow them to try to think about doing these things in a way that's different from what you've done with just brick and mortar instruction. Then finally, I think as we go forward is that we are communicating with our Board of Education. I am keeping a close track of what the engagement is, especially on these asynchronous learning days. We have plans of actually going forward this year with our middle school and high school is actually creating a learning environment that will support hybrid learning schools, kind of a concept of being able to use online learning and having a place for kids to go during the day that may want to be engaged in online learning courses. One of the things that we find is a lot of times people want to do these things, but we actually staff our buildings and we have our buildings organized a way that doesn't allow us to deal with kids that are at different courses and are doing different things during the day and use of technology. So you really have to build your structure like that. So this is gaining a lot of momentum, and what we would like to do is continue to use this as part of our transformational plan to really improve student achievement and really become a place where we can meet the needs of all of our kids.
Rob, any time for questions then?
You guys, that's really exciting, all the things you've done in your school district. For the people that are on our webinar, do you have any questions? And to ask your questions, you can either type it in the chat room, or you can just grab the microphone, click on the talk button, and ask your question. And so I'll open it up now and see what questions there may be. Well, I wrote down a couple because you guys hit on some really important points. And I think the first one I wanted to ask about is you talked about your transformation plan. When you wrote that transformation plan, I guess maybe the bigger question is, you showed a slide that talked about this plan was already moving forward when your new superintendent arrived. What were some of the meetings you put in place that caused that plan to be written, and who was part of that writing and that sort of thing? Maybe talk a little bit about that process that wrote that plan and then actually put it in place to actually move forward. Because so many of us write these plans and put them on a bookshelf and forget about them. So what are some of the things that you've done that really have moved that plan forward and the origins of writing the plan?
I would say our plan was really brought forward by Dr. Hancock when she came in. And really one of the missing pieces for our strategic plan was this technology component. And so the original meeting that we had included all of the stakeholders that were involved in our community. So we had teachers, we had union representation there, and then outside of we had community leaders, we had parents, we had students. And so we really had a good mix of people throughout our whole community represented on the original steering committee for our transformational design plan, and really kind of put the big pieces of where we wanted to go together. And so really there was a lot of buy-in from that point. One of the things that our superintendent did when she first came in is that she went around the community and did a lot of focus groups with different groups of people. So she went to the churches, she went out to community groups and really tried to gather people's input. And really what that did was support all of the things that really online learning and personalized learning brings to the table. And people were saying they wanted these things, even though a lot of people who didn't understand them may resist them or feel like this isn't something that we can afford to do, or they don't understand to do it. And so really it was bringing everybody in together. And so there was actually a broad base in terms of support for it. Now, one of the things what Chris and I did when we had a meeting together that we had in the spring for this online learning requirement. One of the things is we had a community meeting, and I would say out of all the people there, there might have been one parent that stood up and said that they didn't think that this was too good of an idea, and we didn't even say anything, and other parents stood up and said, no, I don't think you're really thinking about what they're saying. And I think if you look at our requirement, it is something that requires either a online course or courses that teachers are already teaching. And I saw in Idaho, I think it was, they had 51% use of technology. So we have a way of being able to meet those kids that they don't have to take a complete asynchronous online course.
I see your question about any online options specifically geared towards the gifted students. That is obviously, you want to address the needs of all the students. And so we have, from time to time, at least, the brief experience for the Kenosha East School. When it was just a high school, we did allow, as long as there was the DEP, or the Differentiated Educational Plan, for gifted middle school students to take a upper level math class. They did not obtain high school credit for it, but it allowed them to advance their math class. So that's something we've always allowed for, and it gives us that greater leverage. Now, one of the things that becomes a kind of a problem for organizations such as the Kenosha East School is that there are a lot of other online organizations out there, and so last spring there was actually a Kenosha News article that was published where they were doing a feature story on another virtual program, a state-sponsored one, and you have a parent in there who says, okay, my kids would be in 3rd grade, but they're so gifted because I had them at home school that I have them doing 5th grade level work, and not having that quality component that exists in the traditional environment, making sure that we're not setting the student up for failure. You want to make sure that you still address all of those concerns and that you're working with the parents, but we do allow for expanded AP offerings. We want to make sure that we're giving the students the ability to work at their own pace, and that's one of the things with the eSchool courses is that we only give the students a manageable schedule, but they do have the ability to move faster. And so we find on average about 15% of the time, if you were to take an average half-credit course as a 9-week course, that about 15% of the time students finished a week or two earlier, which then, if that compounds itself over the year, they're able to expand the courses that they attempt and also the interest that they have for their learning.
So there was one other question in the chat room. Did that get answered about the gifted students? Did that answer that question?
Yes, Rob, they wrote there it did as well.
All right, great. So the other slide you talked about earlier was about, you talked about your eSchool classes getting 80% proficiency or 80% compared to face-to-face courses, and I was curious what your process for determining that is. Does that make sense?
Yes. The initial process that we would go off is that when the courses were adopted, you looked at the course syllabi and then the standards and benchmarks, and the curriculum providers, the online curriculum providers, have gotten pretty good, at least the ones that we've been utilizing, at promoting the units and the standards and benchmarks that are gone through. And a lot of them already base their courses off national standards as it is, because they want to make sure that they're not limiting their marketplace for just one particular region or one particular district or state. So building those off of the national standards. Kenosha is moving forward with the Common Core, a course adoption and expectation, and so that integration becomes actively involved. And so even when a course, actually what happened before I became the eSchool principal, but there was a math course or two that did not get approval for math credit. However, they still got approval for elective credit as far as like a math integration or fundamentals or math-based high school courses when it was still just a high school. And so those were the only really limitations. Any other time when we did adoption and expansion for middle school, for example, there was a social studies geography course that wasn't really in alignment that was with the existing district offering, but they were out of sequence, and so when the content coordinator for social studies looked at it, and he said, well, if somebody did grade 6, 7, and 8 online, by the end of that time, they'd have a really well-rounded delivery of that curriculum, but it's out of sequence compared to the traditional existing 6, 7, and 8 period. So if you had a student that was in traditional grade 6, but then moved to eSchool grade 7, for that year, there was too much of an overlap. And so with any of these courses, the eSchool teachers still have complete freedom to modify and adapt and personalize a lot of these assignments, and they do that through the process of getting to know their students, where their strengths are at, and then differentiating as this format really allows for. So there's a good benefit with that. So we work well by having them review the course catalogs, the curriculum, the standards that go along with it, and then any issues that may come up as well.
Awesome. Okay, my last question, and then we can kind of finish up here. So what are your ongoing measures of success? What is it you are evaluating and sharing between yourselves and with your school board and your superintendent to indicate that this is working for you?
We're using all of our what I would call traditional measures of success. We're still holding kids accountable for the academic achievement based on standardized test scores, grades, and those things. But one of the things that we're looking at, especially on our asynchronous learning day, is participation in kids in the online learning courses. We're also looking at just creating a environment at schools, for example, in our middle school, of monitoring about how many more courses we can offer kids through an online option. You know, we have what I would call an exploratory wheel, where they have, you have your PE course, you have your art, music, you maybe have some foreign language, but really the opportunities to have a whole wide range of courses, so course offerings that are expanded for kids. And so really we're trying to look at a lot of different indicators of whether or not we've improve the education options. And I know we had answered the question about the gifted and talented, but I really believe that a way of challenging kids, especially with the use of online opportunities, that we can push kids a lot farther and really be able to meet the needs of kids, especially in those areas as kids start middle school. You have parents that are really looking at starting their kids on track for upper level courses, and I think that's the way to do it.
Now, as far as the accountability from the school standpoint, for the 3 years that I was at Kenosha School, we did meet our AYP expectations. However, at the time, because our fall period when they did the state standardized testing, we did not have a large enough cell size to report out for the state standards, so we had to work with other identifiers, course completions and grades and identified courses. And so using those other supplemental qualifiers, we still consistently met our AYP expectations. Now, with Wisconsin being one of, I think it's up to 34 or 35 states that have the waivers for No Child Left Behind, and moving forward with those new accountability measures, we're going to be working with the schools to still identify those quality measures. And a lot of this is making the teachers prepared. For those that don't know, Wisconsin does have a state statute requirement that if anybody is teaching an online course, they have to at least meet the minimum requirements and get a state, as Dan mentioned, a state certificate in online teaching. Right now it's a 30-hour minimum PD component piece, of which we support internally in our district and also through the Wisconsin eSchool Network, but a lot of outlets still offer that. But then there's also the continuing expansion of quality online instructional offerings and educating our staff in this experience.
Well, if I could ask everyone to join me in a round of applause for our presenters today. You can click on the little smiley face or the pull-down menu, but choose your picture. Great. So what an outstanding presentation, exciting school district. Chris and Dan, I hope you'll continue to keep sharing your story. It's a great story. It's a great demonstration of what can be done with school districts throughout the United States. Just a reminder, everybody, if you're not coming to the Virtual School Symposium, you're still welcome. Registration is still open. We have another webinar coming up on October 18th, which is about engaging our online learner. And then next month will be a special presentation about the Keeping Pace document that Amy shared about. So next month we'll specifically be focusing on that. And then finally, I would ask those of you who are on this, if you could take a minute to click on the link I'm putting in the chat room and just fill out a quick evaluation on the webinar. Again, we thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our webinars and other events in the future. Thanks, and
Rob, we had
have a great day.
Question. Rob?
Go for it.
or John raised his hand. John, did you have a question? Maybe you didn't. I did want to say one other thing in appreciation, and I specifically didn't say this at the beginning, but you know, it's a nice little plug for INACOL. When the Wisconsin E-School Network was expanding quite a bit, and it was just supported by each of the different districts, we really were at a point of expansion where we needed guidance and structure, and we did partner with INACOL and some of their upper administrators and consulting with them and refining our statewide focus. And so I think the recommendations that came out of that, solidifying quality staff members and also setting up the nonprofit component of it was a tremendous benefit, one in which then that as Wisconsin moved forward and established the Digital Learning Consortium group, they identified two quality components. The first, by no coincidence, was their own funded program through CISA, but the only other component that they've recognized to this point is the Wisconsin E-School Network, and I think part of that is the quality advice that we got from such a learned organization. So I you know, a little plug for them, and it will be the first. Dan and I actually went to the conference last year in Indianapolis. Unfortunately, this year I'll be attending a different conference at the same time, so I'm unable to go to New Orleans. But if anybody is going, I hope you have a nice time.
Anything else from anybody else before we close this out? Well, thanks again, and have a great day.